Hey there, welcome to Souls and Hearts, Be with the Word. This week, really reflecting on the readings and was really moved by the story of David. And I was really moved by the fact that God chose him, even when other people maybe seemed more obvious. And then I was reflecting a little bit on my own journey. And the gospel readings are about Jesus healing the blind man. And I think those are really powerful stories to kind of juxtapose, put together. And so I know that as when I was young and as a victim of abuse as a child, it was really difficult for me because I felt like I had done something bad, that I was somehow um, cursed, wrong, hurt in a way that made me, in some way, an outcast. And I think that I carried that to some extent in my everyday life, even going to school, feeling like there was just a big black mark maybe on me. And so as I'm saying that, I'm wondering if any of you can relate. I know all of us have experienced some kind of trauma in our lives, sometimes more severe kinds of abuse situations. But I also know sometimes it doesn't take a major event. It can be a lot of small events. It can be a lot of painful hurts and wounds that lead one to feel like, leads me anyway, led me to feel unworthy, unwanted, not good enough, all those things. So if you can relate to me a little bit, you might understand why I was really moved by this week's readings. Because Jesus topples everything. He turns everything on its head. And so this man that was born blind, right? The Pharisees were very quick to say, well, who sinned? Was it him? Was it his parents that caused him to be blind? And I think that people judge the victims so often, and we judge ourselves. And so I was so moved then, even to compare that to what is shared in Samuel, right, where God says, I don't look at appearance. I look at the heart, you know? And so I know that as a kid, I received some kind of special grace. I just believe that. I know that when I went to church as a kid, um, I remember at times going on my own and really identifying with Christ on the cross, and somehow just being at Mass and seeing the giant crucifix. I remember feeling that Jesus spoke to me, that he said, I understand your pain and I'm with you. And those words were really just nonverbal. It was just seeing him on the crucifix and just feeling that sense that he understood. And on some level, it was that level of understanding that helped relieve the shame. And maybe took me many years to completely kind of unfold that, to recognize that the abuse that I experienced was not my shame. It was someone else's shame, and that it wasn't for me to carry. And so there I was really moved with the blind man, right? Because Jesus touches him. He knows his heart. He doesn't say that, but I know that to be true. And he took away his outward shame and he gave him his sight. And Jesus even accuses the Pharisees of, in a sense, being the ones who have sin because they are blind, because they are quick to accuse and blame, shift all that blame onto the victim, in a sense. So how powerful, how affirming, again, is God the Father and Christ in these readings to tell me, and I hope you hear that too. I hope you hear the message that you're not to blame for the wounds that were inflicted upon you, right? And that when we turn to God and when we are willing to just kind of surrender to him and allow him to touch us, Literally, Jesus touched this man's eyes. But we allow Jesus to touch us, allow him to see, as he does, into our heart, that all of our pain and suffering becomes something transformative, becomes something meaningful, and is not our shame. As a therapist who works often with abuse survivors, I'm so moved all the time. And sometimes I'm really frustrated too, because I'm working with people who have been hurt very badly. So if you relate to this, I hope you'll hear this. And I sit there and I go, and I hear them blaming themselves, and carrying shame and carrying all these bad feelings. And sometimes it's about feeling like God must have cursed them because he allowed this to happen. Mm-hmm. And that in some way I'm outside of the cycle of redemption, and that I am some kind of curse, or I'm somehow to blame, or what have you. And it breaks my heart. Honestly, it breaks my heart to hear that. And I just want them to join me right in front of that crucifix, like I did when I was 9, basically, and to feel his love, and to know that he's there with you, and that he cares, and that your suffering is not in vain, and it's not what was intended, but it is something that can be brought to good. So thank you for listening, and I really am looking forward to joining Dr. Peter in our discussion when we get back. We'll see you in a moment. Well, hi, Dr. Peter.
Dr. Gerry, it's good to be with you. My goodness, I'm really moved by your introduction today, and like tears in my eyes. So my heart just very big for you. I'm really thankful that you were sharing all of that with us. And so yeah, it's a blessing to be with you here today, and a blessing to be with all of our listeners and our viewers.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I really appreciate that. I really do hope that listeners, whatever they've experienced in their lives, will take something from what I shared, and be somewhat transformative, and not be so alone. Because when I think about that blindness that I was talking about as a child, like I felt very alone in that. Mm-hmm. Because I felt, it was impossible, it seemed to me, to talk to anybody about it. And so I was carrying it. And now I think about it, it's that isolation and loneliness that feeds the negativity,
right?
Feeds the shame, feeds the sense that I don't belong anywhere.
Right. Yeah, it's like you were saying, that burden, and and we do take that on. I see that all the time clinically as well, where we believe that somehow we must have deserved, what happened. Mm-hmm. And because it wouldn't have happened if we didn't deserve it. Kids desperately want to believe in a just world, right? In a good world. And if something terrible happens, like abuse or neglect, they want to be able to do something about it. We want to be able to do something about it as kids, right? So we want to have that at least the illusion of control, right? So yeah, we want the badness to be in us, because then we can become good enough, right? Or we can become hardworking enough, or whatever it is we think that we have to become, so that it'll be better.
Thank you for saying that. I really appreciate you saying that, because the whole psychological element is fascinating. I've often looked at it as, your caregivers are supposed to be fully trustworthy. Mm-hmm. And so if I am 5 years old, let's say, and they're not for some reason, in fact, they're threatening, that it's too overwhelming to believe that my caregiver can't be trusted. My means of survival can't be trusted. It's a lot safer, ironically enough, to believe that I'm the one who's bad. Mm-hmm. And therefore I can kind of protect them on some level, and they can at least remain somewhat safe, even if they really aren't.
Right. There's that hope that's based off of that illusion, right? Mm-hmm. Because if you think about the existential position of a 3-year-old or a 5-year-old or a 7-year-old who comes to the conclusion that his parents are like that deficient or even malicious, that's more than could possibly be borne, right? So there's all kinds of ways that we accommodate for that psychologically. But it has this tremendous cost of changing our whole identity, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't just go away with time. That's not a wound that time is just going to heal. It
Yeah.
actually has, you have to have a new experience of relationship. Uh,
Yeah.
so,
And so I feel like these readings are just so exciting to me. There's so much in them, and the theme of light keeps coming
hmm
up.
yeah.
I feel like since Advent, and it's probably always been, of course, it's always, but since we've been doing
Yeah.
this show, it's like it speaks to me.
Yeah, this light. I totally am on board with you on that. It's how much light is in the gospel, right? And of course, we
Mhm.
hear it all the time, right? The light of the world and blah blah blah. But like, yeah, it's really been coming through for me too.
And it's funny because we were talking. I was sharing with you a little while ago one of my favorite new hymns. I always say favorite new hymns because it changes all the time. But I often have like a hymn that I'm like into right now. And
Right.
the one that I'm like into right now is Be Thou My Vision. And one of the things that, and we were talking about that, I think privately last week. And
hmm
one of the things, I don't know the whole history, I should go look it up. But my understanding that it was written by a monk who lost his vision at some point in his time as a monk. And if I'm wrong, people will correct me, I'm sure, but that's what I understand. And so when he says, "Be thou my vision, O Lord of my heart, be,
hmm
be not all else to me save that thou art." He's
hmm
completely surrendering himself to
Yep.
God as a
Yep.
blind man,
Yep.
and letting God be his vision. And I don't know, that just the lines in this powerful hymn just touch me, because he says, I love the part in the second verse where he says, "Be thou my great Father, and I thy true Son." And
Yeah.
again, like 2 weeks ago, I talked about fatherlessness and
Right.
my own fatherlessness, and I moved to tears thinking about that, because I know that God the Father has. It took a while, but he became that for me,
Yes.
and to
Yes.
own my identity as a true son. It's just healing. It's just powerful, and it's just affirming, and it's my identity. And
Yes.
so, if you're listening, like, if you feel that way at all in some way in your life, I really hope you'll hear those words, because I feel like that's the whole point of the Bible, is that God wants to communicate these things to us, right? He wants us to know that we're his children and that we can walk in light.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And that's beautiful, Gerry. Over and over and over again, as a clinician, I hear people like really struggling with, sometimes even with despair, right?
mhm,
Over the way that they see themselves, the way that they understand themselves. And think about this. Go back to this image of this blind man, right? Blind from birth, extremely vulnerable in that culture, right? There's no braille, there's no, his prospects for employment are limited to begging, very vulnerable, and then also believed to be a sinner even by the disciples of Jesus himself, right? Because that the
mhm,
gospel opens with, who sinned, him or his parents? We want to know where to put the blame here,
right, right.
and to be treated as a sinner the whole time, his whole life. I mean, talk about how knocked down and how like
Mm.
rejected by society. How friendless this man may be,
Yeah,
in
I
that
love
moment.
it. It's funny because I think of myself a little bit, when I was younger, as being extremely awkward. Which is, I love that God says, God doesn't just look at appearances. Like, I was this
Right.
awkward, you know, goggly glasses and pimples, and like, super thin and whatever, and just, I was the biggest nerd ever. Like, my escape was in books. I was a huge Lord of the Rings fan, playing games, reading comic books. Like, my escape was, I found worlds to escape into. So if you had seen me, in seventh grade or sixth grade or something, you would go, "Whoa, this is like this, scraggly little nerd," basically.
Mhm.
And back then, you could get beat up for that, right? And so, right, and so, but when I hear the story of Samuel, and I hear, and now, of course, unfortunately, not unfortunately, it's good for him, but David does come out, and he actually is apparently good looking, right?
Right.
And he's ruddy faced and everything, and yet, but God does say he looks at the heart. So I don't think he chose David because he was good looking alone, because
Right.
otherwise he could have picked another
Right.
brother.
Right.
He chose David because he knew his heart.
Right. Yeah, well,
And
think
so,
about David again too in that situation. He amounted to so little that he didn't even get invited to the sacrifice. He wasn't even there. He said, "You go tend the sheep. Like you're not even being considered for this." Now that may be because he was really young, you
right.
know, and Samuel was choosing the king of Israel, so it's big stakes here. And then, in the next chapter of Samuel, there's gonna be the scene of David and Goliath, right? So, and he was young then too. He hadn't grown up a lot between chapter 16 and chapter 17 of Samuel. So, yeah, he's just like not even being seen. He's not even being seen in that situation,
Yeah.
And that's what
Yeah.
happens in a lot of this. And one thing I was thinking about too, what you were talking, is that it's not just about abuse. It's also about neglect, the
Oh yeah.
not being seen, like the crushing effect of what doesn't happen,
Mhm.
in life when we're little,
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah,
yeah,
I think that's powerful. I think neglect and abuse go hand in hand often, but sometimes there isn't overt abuse, but it's just an absence. Like I see that even in fairly well-to-do families, and their parents working very hard, providing, but everyone is so busy. There's a sense in which there's a kind of emotional neglect that happens, and
right, right.
which I find very sad. I feel like that's pretty common. Um, but can I bring up something? I just don't want to miss what St. Paul says.
Yes, we definitely
And
light.
and children of light. And
Yes.
and I love that. I can remember going back in Advent. Remember we talked about armor of light.
Mm-hmm.
Remember that? And it was like, wow, I never really thought about armor of
Armor
light.
of
Like,
light.
what is
Yeah.
that? Like that feels science fiction to me, so I really relate to that. But but we are children of light still, right? So it's like if you think about it, like we are shining from the inside out, and because we're in His image, and because we're redeemed by Him and the work that He did, and all that, and it says, I love this, that it produces every kind of goodness and righteousness and truth.
Every kind. Every kind.
Yeah.
And he says, not only are we children of light, but he says, you are light.
Mm-hmm.
You are light. It's not just that we're children of light, children of God. God is light. Okay, I guess we're children of the light. Now, children, but also light itself, right?
Yeah.
That is really powerful, right?
Right. And then the quote of arise from the dead, like awake, O sleeper, arise from the dead, and Christ will give you light, is to me is just so moving. And then that's put together with the blind man. So
Right,
rising from the dead is like having sight
right,
when you were
right.
previously blind. So that's powerful. The other thing too that I just feel is worth mentioning, because sometimes we don't, or we really haven't talked much about the responsorial psalm. Like now if you listen to Hear the Word, which is our new extra little podcast where we just read the readings, if you're interested, we do read the responsorial psalm, which we didn't used to do for Be With the Word when we were reading to you. But if you listen to it again, this is a psalm that we hear all the time, or it's probably the one people are most familiar with, the 23rd Psalm. But there are lines in there that kind of blow me away every time I hear them. And it might not surprise you, probably, Dr. Peter, to hear me point out, even though I walk in the dark valley, I know
Ellie.
it's so repeated. I fear, but nevertheless, I fear no
Fear no
evil. And
evil.
here's the line, for you are at my side. And it's that's the piece. It's the connection and the attachment. You are at my side. And I love this because it is exactly what our church teaches all the time about suffering, is that there are times when suffering will get removed, and that can happen. But there are lots of times, especially for abuse survivors, where the suffering never completely goes away. There's a wound that won't, there'll be maybe a lot of healing, but there's still a suffering that remains in this life. But what we are promised is that we won't be alone, that He will be by our side in this world. And that's what this psalm says to me. You are by my side. And the other thing that I think is so powerful is Jesus says in the Gospel of John, He says, after saying neither he nor his parents sinned, He said, this is key, it is so that the works of God might be made visible through him. So I feel a bit like just why I was called to even open up this week, and I didn't really want to. But I did because of that verse. Because if any way the works of God might be made visible, and I know I'm a horrible sinner and all that, and I know that I've failed and made mistakes tons of times, and this is not, I can go to confession for that, not here, but if in any way God can be made visible through this through our work at Be With Word, I hope it will happen, because that is what we're called to do,
Well,
right?
you're being light right now, Gerry. You're being light right now to me, and I'm sure to our listeners as well, because you're making good come from the things that happen to you by being able to share your story here, and that is a precious thing. I was also resonating with the exact same passage at the exact same time when you were bringing that up. I was like, can we? Because I'm like, do I interrupt? Do I go back to that? And it's like, there he is, right there with it.
Right.
Like that God only allowed those things to happen to you so that a greater good could come from it. A greater good could come from it, and that and part of that is being able to share that here,
Thank you. See, I'm honored by that, and that's the other flip side. I don't like to. I feel it's hard to hear that.
Mm-hmm. You have trouble taking that in. You have
Yeah.
trouble taking that in sometimes. That you could actually be light.
Right. It's hard. I want to be, and yet I'm terrified.
Yeah.
Of it at the same time.
Well, we often are looking for light outside of us, but going back to the Psalm, we're in the dark valley. I mean, our Lord tells us, you're in the dark valley, and where are we going to find the light? We're going to find it in God himself, and we're going to find it in those that are close to God.
Mm-hmm. And in the last part, only goodness and kindness follow me all the days of my life. I really do. I don't think he's saying that no bad things will ever happen. Right. I think he's saying that when you have surrendered in this way, and that suffering, even though it will happen, or difficult things, it won't have the hold on you anymore. And then, therefore, also just the joys of life will also just have more of an impression as well. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But a lot of people want to know how to get there, and we're trying to in this show sort of say how that is. I think that is about surrendering, and that is allowing Jesus to love us in our pain, in our difficulty, even when we're sinning, even when we're broken. That something can happen where we say, wait a second, and we turn to him and say, Lord, I need you right now because I'm in trouble or because I'm hurt. And that's, I think, where the transformation happens. We want to scrub ourselves clean and then present ourselves to him.
Right. We want to heal ourselves so that we are presentable enough, right, to be loved by God. And it doesn't work that way. But for some people, that's really, really hard. It's really hard to go to a God that feels like has abandoned us. Right? Yeah. That becomes like the real. It's almost like an autoimmune spiritual disorder, right? Because it's the very thing you need is the very thing that seems like caused the trouble, right? The abandonment by God. And I've run across this over and over and over again. Some people really wrestling with despair around, does God really love me? And if he really loved me, how could all of this have happened to me? How could this have happened to me? And what good could possibly come from it? Right. But that's where you're going back to what you said about everything getting turned upside down. There was no way David could predict that later that day he would be anointed the king of Israel. Mm-hmm. There was no way that later that day the man born blind would know that not only would he regain his sight, but that he would witness forever in the Gospels, Christ's love and mercy and goodness. I mean, that's an amazing turn of events. Yeah. But I think what happens is that sometimes we just get caught up in what we think we know. Right. We get caught up in what we think we know, and we extrapolate. We make generalizations from our experience, and we say it's always going to be this way.
Right. Right. What do you make, Dr. Peter, of the clay? That Jesus puts clay on the guy's eyes. I always find that fascinating. Like, so he spits into it, basically.
Yeah, it's very earthy, right? It's very real, Well, I was taken back when I was reading it this time, which I don't think I ever connected to before, was that's what Adam and Eve were made of. They're made of clay. And so going back to the original material, and also it's very immediate. Like you were talking about that contact, you
Hmm.
know, that was just like because Christ could have healed him from afar. Like he healed others from afar, right? He could
Right.
heal this guy from afar, but no, he wanted that closeness and intimacy. He wanted to be so close to him. He wanted people to see that he was not fleeing from this sinner, this judged man, this
Yeah.
condemned man on the side of the road,
Yeah.
you know.
And then he
Um,
sends them though to have then the clay washed off.
right. So
So
he's got
it's
to, the man's got to take some initiative here. He's
mm,
got to actually make his way. He's got something that he has to contribute, with his own autonomy and his own initiative, right? Jesus supporting that, right? So it's two things. A lot of times people in their recovery are hoping that it just all gets taken away, right? But God, because he honors that intellect and that will that he's given us, wants us to be active participants in that, right? So the man has this opportunity to show that he believes,
yeah.
right? And he goes and he washes and he sees, and that strengthens him to give the testimony and to suffer a tremendous penalty. To be thrown out of the synagogue was a horrible thing
Right.
in Israelite culture. Like you saw his parents trembling at the prospect of being thrown out of the synagogue, right? They
Right.
they passed the buck to him. Why? Because he's got the strength to witness now.
Yeah.
So like so much came out of that blindness.
Yeah. Oh, right. And like, so the whole idea that, I love that, by the way. And the whole idea that the Jews would have thought that that the blind man was simply sinful,
Hmm.
and that having vision meant your virtue. Whereas Jesus actually turns that completely on its head, and he makes it really clear at the end of that gospel reading, where basically he's saying, no, the blind man is the virtuous one,
Right. The
and
blind man is the virtuous one.
and
Yeah.
the people who see are actually who believe they have it all. They have
Right.
all the answers. They think they see are actually holding on to their sin.
Right.
And that kind of really moved me. Like it's just the whole idea, and that takes us back to all the way back to Samuel, where it says, "God sees what." Or wait, I want to make sure I quote
He
it right.
sees the heart, right? Something about like
Well, not as man sees, but as
as
God
God
as
sees.
does sees.
Right.
Yeah. So again, that God's rules are kind of different than human ones.
Oh yeah. His ways are not our ways. And these are very unlikely superheroes, right? David, not even considered, right? He's
Right.
going to become the king of Israel. He's going to become beloved, right? He is beloved of God. And then this blind man is like a superhero. Like he becomes like infused not just with the physical healing, but with I think a spiritual healing as well. To be able to stand up, unsupported, unsupported by his parents, unsupported by anybody else, and give witness to the Pharisees.
Yeah.
To really challenge them. And they're like, "Who are you? You're born in. Who are you?" But going back to St. Paul, what St. Paul says is that take no part in the fruitless works of darkness, but rather expose them. So there's the blind man exposing the
Wow. Yeah.
hypocrisy. He's exposing the rejection of the Pharisees of Christ. He's exposing their ill will, their malice. He's saying, you've already asked me, like, and so it's like, wow, are the tables ever turned? you
Yeah.
know
Yeah.
and that can happen for us too. No
Yeah.
matter
For sure.
how downtrodden and how rejected we feel ourselves to be, we can come back from that.
Hmm. Hmm.
And there's only one sin, and that sin is that can't be forgiven, and that's the blasphemy against the Holy Spirit. And I really believe that that's when we give up all hope that God loves us,
Mm.
and we succumb to that.
Yeah.
That's the
Yeah.
real danger in all of this, is that
Right.
we actually believe the lies, around what our identity is, that we aren't beloved, that we misunderstand, that we sink into the darkness.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. Right. Well, I'm glad. I know that I have sometimes felt that way, but overall, I think that I was given some kind of grace, right, to truly on
I
some level
really,
be upheld.
I believe that. I do believe that. You've talked about that before, and I do believe that. And I'm not talking about when I say that we sink into that it doesn't happen from time to time. It's
Right.
if we commit to that, if we hold that to be true irrevocably, that we're unwilling ever to give that up, then God's not going to intrude and force us to believe otherwise.
And I think that produces humility,
Yes.
actually, right?
Yes.
Because we realize, wow, he loves me even though I'm broken, even though I've made mistakes, and yet he sees into your heart and sees who you really are
Hmm.
and loves that.
And
And
loves
and
you anyway.
and
Yeah.
that produces, in my mind, that doesn't make go for an ego trip. That actually produces a lot of humility and compassion and kindness. Actually, I did want to say that, like when I was talking in the intro about working with clients who were so hard on themselves and who blamed themselves or even saw themselves as somehow outside of God's normal redemptive cycle. They've been chosen for
Hmm.
some kind of horrible punishment or something.
Right.
Those people are often the most compassionate and kind people I know. Not always. I mean, there's everybody's different, but by and large, and it moves me again. I'm like, wow, how can you be so hard on yourself and yet you're kind and compassionate to others? And I feel like God wants to see right through all of that to open up the kindness and compassion for self in a healthy way.
Hmm.
But it's the right kind of humility
Hmm.
because it's the right way that God sees us, not grand, not better than we are, not less than we are, but exactly who
Right.
we are.
Right.
So, well, I think we need to probably move to our takeaways, right?
I think so.
Okay, action items for this week. First of all, well, before I even say that, like, really hope that you're enjoying our show. We'd love to hear comments. We've received some really nice comments. Thank you, Janice, for your really kind comment from 2 weeks ago. That you really like feeling like our show gets better each week, and we're really working on it as we've kind of retooled our show, and as you can tell, trying to be a little more creative in some ways, being more vulnerable in other ways. Definitely, I think I was doing that today. So I hope Janice, you've enjoyed. But also, please share the show if you know people that you think would benefit from hearing our message. Also, check out our courses because we're offering some new courses, and one in particular on restoring marriage after pornography. So we hope that you will, if that applies for you or someone you know, please share it. It's also a great course for individuals who are thinking of getting married and want to do some personal work to prepare for marriage. There's a lot of great marriage stuff in that course that's just generally good, as well as how to overcome addiction.
Hmm.
And we've got some great blogs as well coming up. So we're
Hmm.
excited every week for you to join us and read those. And Fly on the Wall. There's another Fly on the Wall that
Yep.
you can access. More recent one that is a little bit. I think we're challenging on some
Yeah, we're
difficult
getting
topics.
challenging.
Yeah.
That's about the sex abuse scandal in the church. We're heading into that with eight
Mhm.
of us, having a really spirited discussion about that. So we invite you to stay for that. And we also have another course coming up on A Catholic's Guide to Choosing a Therapist.
Yes.
So that's going to become live. That's a free course. So if you know of somebody that is on the fence about that, or has decided to find a therapist but doesn't know how, everything you need is in that course. So
Yeah.
so lots of beautiful things coming through. And like Dr. Gerry said, let us know what your thoughts are. We'd love to hear from you. We're putting out some word on some polls about what kinds of courses you would like and what you'd like to focus on, because we really want to make sure that what we're doing is meeting your needs. So.
Hmm. Oh, and check out Catholic Late Night if you haven't already. I'm on there. I just did a whole thing on addiction,
Hmm.
and a few weeks prior, Dr. Peter was on that show. They're two young guys, great stuff. They like to reach out, especially to the younger audience, high school students, college age,
Yeah.
students, and had a great time talking with
Yeah,
them.
that's John Welch and Patrick Hannis, great young guys. So happy to support them, and they've been great at supporting us as well. So we're
Yeah.
really thankful for the relationship there.
All right, our
Right.
takeaway, our action item. Okay,
Yes.
here it is. And this, I was really thinking about the clay of Jesus touching the person and how the body is important. And we were maybe going to talk about that this week, but we didn't really quite get to it because in therapy, the body is important too. In terms of healing, we don't just work only on the mind. It's a bit of a mind, emotion, and body kind of thing for at least the kind of therapy I know Dr. Peter and I do. But I'm asking you this week. I know it's Lent, and so you're probably giving up something, and that's all good. Don't change that. But what can you do that's kind of an act of kindness for your body? How can you do something that shows that you are taking care of your body? Maybe even helping your body release something or cleanse something. And not just talking about sin, just talking about just holding on to tension, holding on to stuff, whatever it might be. And so, I mean, there's tons of ways you can do that. That might, pick one that's appropriate to you or that might mean something to do. Anything from, having a bath, having a nice relaxing bath. I mean, for me, I usually just like run and shower quick and then run to the next thing. But to actually soak in a bath and actually just like let your body just feel the water, whatever it might be. Maybe it's a massage if that's an appropriate thing to do for you. Let your body be cared for. Maybe this wouldn't be me typically, but or ever, but having your nails done. I know for some people, I know my wife, that's relaxing for her. It wouldn't be for me, but like anything that is about taking care of your body and letting and maybe in that process, not just noticing the body, but noticing maybe Jesus or God, like loving your body in that moment. It was what I was thinking. How's that sound, Dr. Peter?
Sounds good. And it may come up that you find that really hard. And if so, that's really interesting. What is hard about that? What makes that hard? Because sometimes we dump a lot of stuff into our body. Sometimes we condemn our bodies in some way or other, and that's really common again if you're coming from a history of abuse. So,
Mm-hmm.
Any difficulties with that is we suggest these things. Notice what you're experiencing, and that might be something that gives you a direction upon which to work for prayer, or if you're in therapy, to bring it to your therapist, or to work
Mm-hmm.
on it in other ways. So.
And I just want to add a little something too. It's occurring to me. If for any reason anything that was shared today was at all triggering for you, or brought up some difficult memories, or brought up some, personal challenges, really encourage you this to go see maybe a therapist and talking to a counselor or therapist about that, or a trusted friend, or whatnot. If you're bothered at all, our show is not providing therapy. It's not what we're doing here. We're just sharing our own journeys and trying to provide some education. But certainly reach out. If you're looking for a Catholic therapist, you can go to catholictherapist.com. You can go to the Catholic Psychotherapy Association website and look at the directory and find a really good therapist that way. And so just want you to make sure that you understand that too.
Yeah. And we have actually a whole course coming out in the future on how to take care of yourself too. And that's actually another free course that'll come out probably in the next 3 or 4 weeks. So we're not far from getting that one online as well. So that's got lots of ideas about how you can take care of yourself as well. So
yeah.
All right.
Well,
it's been a pleasure to be with you, Dr. Gerry. Thank you again for your vulnerability. You are going to be a tough act to follow because I'm on next week, I imagine. So,
okay.
But I really appreciate that. Thank you for that.
Thank
it's
you.
an honor to be with you.
Thanks for your support. Love you, brother.
Love you, brother. And thank you to all of our audience. I really appreciate you being with us on this pilgrimage, on this journey. And All Souls and Hearts exists for you. So we're honored and blessed to have you with us as well.
All right. Be still.
Believe.
Be loved.
Be loved.
Take good care.
God bless.